I also appreciate being included in this program. It's one of the high points of the year for me. Have a ton of fun, which we will hopefully have today, and I get to see you twice this time, for the first time. And in the morning, my goal is, I have 2 hours, and by the time lunch comes, everybody in your life will pay attention to you, listen, do what you want them to do. That's what we're going for. And not just the people that you try to manage and supervise and get to listen to you, but most importantly, a lot of times people around the organization that you have no real direct control over, that you need to get your paperwork back or review things. So we'll get them to respond more quickly. You can even manage up. And as I pointed out to a few people at happy hour last night, it even works on your spouse, in-laws, and even teenagers. And if I were you, I would be dubious right now. I'd say, who is this guy who tells me suddenly everyone is going to be putty in my hands? So I thought I would start by demonstrating how well it's going to work. And I am going to try to influence some of you right before everybody's eyes. So as Dr. Manzer pointed out, I used to be a lawyer, so I thought I'd pick from my influence case maybe the most famous case in the history of America, the McDonald's coffee case. You may remember a woman went into McDonald's, got a cup of coffee, spilled it in her lap, successfully sued McDonald's for $3 million. If you had to characterize that jury verdict as crazy or reasonable, please raise your hand if it sounds reasonable. Please raise your hand if it's crazy. Okay, what I'm going to try to do is get half of you to change your mind and say reasonable. I'm going to try to influence you. All I'm going to do is tell you the whole story. Because I'm not sure whether you're aware of this or not, but sometimes the media doesn't tell you the whole story. And I don't want to break any illusions, but sometimes they tell you just enough so you say, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. So here is the whole story. The woman in question was 79 years old, seated in the passenger seat of a parked car with her styrofoam cup of McDonald's coffee. As she was breaking the lid loose from the cup turned, spilled into her lap, and people say, coffee's hot, you should be careful, and I could not agree more. But what never came out in the mainstream media is the coffee they were selling at McDonald's at that time was much, much hotter than we're used to coffee being. So the evidence showed that typically coffee is 110 to 120 degrees when we buy it in a restaurant. This coffee at McDonald's between 180, 190 degrees, 70 degrees hotter than we're used to coffee being. And I want to I can't picture 180 degree liquid, so I want to try to put that into context for you. That is the same differential between 30 degrees and 100 degrees. And if school were in session here in Stillwater and it were 30 degrees out today, that would be too cold for the modern student to come to class. They would stay home. I know the dean just had this sensitivity about these young people, but yeah, they don't come to class when it's cold. Now you add 70 degrees to that, now it's 100 degrees, now it's too hot for them to come to class. So 70 degrees exceeds their entire comfort spectrum. You add that difference on top of 110, 180 degrees is hot. A matter of fact, so hot, burns the skin off the human body on contact, which is what happened to this poor woman. She was wearing cotton sweatpants, so it held the coffee against her lap. She was hospitalized for 6 days to have skin grafts. I think you know what skin grafts are. So I'm going to leave her in the hospital for a second and switch from burgers to pizza. And unless you're a boomer, you probably don't remember when Domino's Pizza used to have this deal, if they could not get the pizza there in 30 minutes, it was free. Anybody want to guess why they stopped this great promotion? It was car wrecks. As a matter of fact, that's a bit of an understatement. They stopped after they killed the 49th person. That is when, after the 49th person was killed by Domino's delivery drivers, that's when they stopped. And my question was, what was magic about 49? Why didn't they stop after 1 or 5 or 10? Do you think they were sitting around Domino's headquarters going, let's not kill 50, we'll run it up to 49 and then we'll shut it down? And the answer is, of course not. 49 is where they had the giant multi-million-dollar jury verdict where they had to reevaluate their business plan, which if you think about it is find people who can't get a better job to race around town in a poorly maintained vehicle trying to get a $1 bonus by getting the pizza there on time. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out there's going to be collateral damage. So back to our woman in the hospital. She didn't spill coffee and get a lawyer. She contacted McDonald's on her own behalf because she was a widow living on $1,000 a month of Social Security. Most of her medical bills were covered by Medicare, but she had a copay of about $20,000. And she said, I'm 79 years old, living on $1,000 a month. There's literally no way I'm going to be able to pay this off before I die. So on her own behalf, without a lawyer, she asked McDonald's, would you pay the $20,000? And McDonald's said, no, coffee's hot, you should be careful. And her position is, I know coffee's hot, I've been drinking coffee for 60 years, but I didn't know it was that hot. And if you're like me, you've got these relatives who come to your house on Thanksgiving. In my case, it's Uncle Gary. And he says things like this, people today are so stupid. You have to warn them that coffee's hot. And I said, well, listen here, Uncle Gary, what if I handed you a cup of liquid and it said, warning, this liquid will burn your skin off? Would you treat that like a cup of coffee, or would you get a safe suit in the jaws of life? So McDonald's wouldn't pay, so she got a lawyer. And I know we've got a few lawyers here, but if you're not a lawyer, this is where the evil character enters the story, right? Right? But when you're the lawyer and you sue McDonald's, you get to look through McDonald's records, and the lawyer found two things I think you might be interested in. One, why is that coffee 180, 190 degrees? And the answer is marketing research. McDonald's had marketing research that says if you make coffee very, very hot, people say it tastes good, even if it doesn't. So we now know there's two good ways to get coffee. One would be actually get good coffee, and two would be take bad coffee and make it 180, 190 degrees. Second thing the lawyer figured out, and I'm sure you figured this out, this is not the first woman to be hospitalized with coffee burns. In McDonald's files were hundreds of people who'd been hospitalized with severe coffee burns because their coffee is much hotter than we're used to. So the lawyer said to the jury, we need to send a message, doesn't need to be crazy, but like dominoes, we need to get their attention. So what if we looked at 1% of annual coffee profit? 1% of annual coffee profit. So we're not talking about gross sales, no profit off the Big Mac. And what accountants testified to, and by the way, 1% of the year is about 3 days. So the accountants testified that each day, McDonald's earned $1.2 million profit selling coffee, so we're looking at about 2.5 days worth of coffee profit. If you had to characterize that jury verdict as reasonable or crazy, how many would say reasonable? Please raise your hand. Okay, good, it's gonna be a good day, I'm lucky. I have two things. So it looks like we got half, and it doesn't matter what the answer is, we don't care about that. What we care about is what did I do to try to influence you? I heard information, the facts, told you the facts, right? So here is the big message from this morning, and if you can take this to heart, all of your influencing will be more successful. The facts don't matter, right? And what happens is people try to influence with the facts, right? And I did use the facts, but I think I used other things. But let me explain why the facts don't work. You probably have a friend or a relative who's a member of the wrong political party. Right? Take them out to lunch, explain the facts. How's that work out for you? They didn't even budge. They seem more committed to the cause than before you tried to influence them. Because when we try to influence with the facts, whether you realize it or not, what you're doing is you're not really trying to influence them, you're trying to convince them that you're right. So in order for your influence strategy to work, the other person would have to say this to you when you're done making your pitch. You know, you're right. I am wrong. And I'd like to thank you for proving me wrong. And please, in the future, if you ever notice I'm wrong again, don't hesitate to bring it to my attention, even in meetings in front of other people. Yet how many times in your life, if you think about it, have you essentially seen two people at a meeting and one was trying to prove the other one wrong with witnesses, right? So put me down for it's not happening. Right? Put me down for that's not happening. So besides telling you the facts, what else did I do? I made it personal. I used the domino story to have a theme of some companies might hurt people in order to make a profit, and nobody jumped out of their seat and said that'll never happen, right? And I think that was kind of the same point. What else did I do?
Appeal to sympathy or sensitivity, and people could relate.
I appealed to your emotions because I thought your emotions might drag your brain along. Right, because of how you felt about it. So I definitely did that. Anything else? The big thing I was trying to do, no one's mentioned yet.
You demonstrated why $3 million was not that crazy of a number.
Yeah, I tried to put things into context, the money into context, the temperature into context. Yes?
You didn't tell us the defense's side of it.
Yeah, I only gave you one side of the story. Yeah?
You brought others into it with the other complaints.
I showed it was a pattern. Yeah, I was just kidding. That was a good point. I did make them seem unsympathetic. Yeah. But the biggest thing I was trying to do, and maybe I didn't do a good job of it, but while I was telling the story, I tried to look at each of you and I was smiling while I was talking because I was trying to get you to like me, because I figured some of you might do this. It still seems crazy, but he seems like a nice guy, so I put my hand up, help him out. So what I think influence is really about, seriously, is it comes down to if you like people, you do what they want you to do. If you don't like them, what's that?
There's a lot of Gen Xers.
I would say this goes from whatever came before the boomers to whatever 6-year-olds. If they like you, they will do it. If they don't like you, they don't want to do it. They might do it, but they don't want to do it. Now let's think about this. I don't just make this stuff up. Your best friend calls you and says, bad news. I need a ride to the airport on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. It's your best friend. You don't tell your best friend to take Uber. It's your best friend, you drive him to the airport, right? You don't even ask why. You don't need reasons. Your best friend asked you, your best friend called you, said, I'm moving again. And you're like, uh-oh, right? It's the worst thing, right? I'm moving again. And if you're like me, you're like, man, we've been calling movers for 20 years. Why don't you call movers, and why do you move so often? But if it's your best friend, you show up. And if you're like me, you move sofa cushions and lampshades and brooms, and you act like you're helping, right, to support the dean. It's funny when I tell that story because the dean who was here before, just 2 years ago, I roped him into driving a U-Haul full of furniture to Colorado with me because he's my best friend, so he had to do it. And I'm sure his back still hurts and he's still complaining. So I can tell you that it works. Now, let's contrast that with the opposite. You're at work, a previous employer, because I'm sure everyone at your current employer is charming. But let's say at a past employer, there was someone there who was a jerk. And they asked you to do something that you're clearly supposed to do. Right? Now, I know all of you are too big to not do something just because the person, you don't like the person, but wouldn't you agree that if the person is a jerk, you prioritize that task in such a way that its likelihood of making it to the top of your to-do list somewhat remote, right? So the whole thing comes down to how much people like you. And it isn't liking like I want you to come over to my house and I want to go to lunch. It's business liking. For example, I really like Dr. Manzer. He says he likes me, and I believe it to some extent, but we don't agree on anything. And we've only been to lunch once together in 32 years, right? But I really, really like him, and that's what business liking is. You admire someone, you trust them, and you respect someone, so we can behave at work in ways that cause people to admire and to trust and to respect us. And that's what I think it ultimately comes down to, and that's what we're going to talk about this morning, how exactly that works. So you may at any point interrupt me if you have a question, or just want to make a comment, or especially if you have a complaint, which means something I said doesn't sit well or doesn't resonate or doesn't sound right to you. So far, are there any questions, comments, or complaints? Anybody, anything? Okay, well, let me tell you 2 things about the McDonald's case before we go on that you may not know. Did you know she never did get her $3 million? That jury verdict was lowered on appeal to $750,000, which was suspiciously 3 times actual damages, which is kind of a rule of thumb in some states. Second thing you may not know is in the Wall Street Journal, McDonald's official reaction to the jury was, we cannot figure out how to lower the temperature of our coffee. And if you think about it, they paid big money for big city PR there, right? We can't figure out how to lower the temperature of coffee. See, I'm a professor, I've got spare time. I sent him an email, I said, Dear McDonald's, I read in the Wall Street Journal, you can't figure out how to lower the temperature of coffee. I've got an idea. Put the coffee next to the French fries. They're never hot. And I sent that out. Never heard back from them. So my first big idea is the facts don't matter. My second big idea is people are annoying. Right? And again, if I say something doesn't sit well, just yell out. I found everyone to be charming and reasonable when I'm trying to influence them. But I found just the opposite. When I'm trying to influence people, they can be annoying. So what I'm going to do is share with you actually 3 PowerPoint slides filled with my personal annoying characteristics. So if you were trying to influence me, these are things that you would find out about me that are annoying. And I see, Anna, you're looking, where are these annoying things in the materials? It's blank, because I don't want this to get out. So I'm going to show you, but please don't write it down, because I don't need this to get out. So here they go. This is annoying things about me I'm confessing to you. Here comes the first one. I am a hypocrite. Now, I wish I wasn't. I try not to be, but if I'm going to be very honest with you, I tend to hold myself to a lower standard than I do other people. And you may ask, why do you do that? And the answer is this allows me to compare myself favorably to other people and make me feel good about myself. Let me give you an example. If I'm driving and someone cuts right in front of me, usually I can maintain a civil demeanor. But the operative word there is usually. If it has been a stressful day or a stressful week, sometimes if someone pulls right in front of me, sometimes I drive a little close to their bumper, I flash my lights, I mumble a few things in the interest of public safety to show them it was a near miss. Now, if I accidentally pull out in front of you and you behave exactly as I behave, I don't say that's what I do, that's what I get. Now I have a completely different attitude. I say, what's the matter with you? Haven't you ever made a mistake? Why don't you calm down, relax, and take your finger down? Right? The whole thing depends on who pulls out in front of who. Another problem I have is I play favorites, which is not fair, but I can't help it. The more I like someone, the more favorably I look upon everything they do. Right? So if my favorite employee makes a mistake, what do I say? Mistakes happen. Please try to be more careful next time. If it is my least favorite employee who makes yet another mistake, then I decide we cannot have any more mistakes, and I start the 2-year process it takes to terminate a state employee. I interpret rules to my benefit, so when a new rule comes out, my brain bends it up, bends it down, bends it around, whatever I have to do to keep going. I don't want to lie to you, I want to be honest. Sometimes I ignore the rules. Here's how rules work when you're a professor. Students come in to see you, any question they have, you open a double drawer filled with rules, pretty much the answer is no. That's how it goes. However, some sad sack comes in, sad circumstances. Sometimes I leave the drawer closed and I do what I think is fair instead of what the rule says is fair. So I've just confessed to you, I don't follow the rules, but of course I care what you think about me, so I just want you to know I only break the rules for sad cases. So if you come in and see me and they're walking sideways or they have a divot out of their head or they're very physically unattractive, I will give them a break. But if they're charming and good looking, then I don't, because I figure the rest of the world's taking care of them. So at least in my mind, I'm equalizing things. I like people better if they like me, so clearly I'm shallow and superficial, right? But if you like me, I'll like you back. It's really that easy. Here's more. Oh, I like my ideas better because I made them up. Matter of fact, my idea of a good idea is that I made it up. That's pretty much how that goes. I think it's fun to say no when I have the power to do so. So I think, I've never been in charge of anything, but I think if I was, like my head would get big and it would be annoying. So it's probably good I've never been in charge of anything. You can't change how I see the world. I'm old. It's important to me to look good in the eyes of others. Let's be honest. There's a lot of things to know. I don't know 1/10% about anything, but I think I know everything. So I'll be giving a lecture and some student will yell, what, do you think you know everything? And I'm like, wait, let's think about this for a minute. What don't I know? Because I don't know what I don't know. So I'm like, yeah, I guess I do. You know, I do know everything. Oh, I like to be right. But I love to say I told you so. It can be a horrible day at work, but somewhere around 4:30, I get to tell one person I told you so. That was a day worth getting up for, right? That is a great joke. I hate to admit I'm wrong in those rare situations where it looks like I might be. Don't get the wrong idea. I'm talking about every 5 or 6 years, it looks like I might be wrong. And what I tend to do is dig in and argue louder because it's embarrassing to be wrong. And finally, if you're trying to influence me, this is how I make decisions. I decide what I want the answer to be, and then I make up the logical reasons for why I'm right. So if I get up in the morning and I read in the newspaper, some senator out west has done something in a bathroom stall he should not have done. First thing I need to know is, which party is he in? Right? Because if he's in my political party, I have to go to lunch with the old, well, we're all human. These things happen on both sides of the aisle. But if it's the other party, hot damn, there you go again. What's the matter with you people, right? So the whole thing comes down to what I want the answer to be. So I've shared with you my annoying personal characteristics, and I somewhat worry that you're sitting out there saying, who is this guy with all the annoying characteristics? And I think obviously it's not what I was hoping you'd be thinking. Here is what this is you thinking from your seat. Wait a minute. I know some other people who have these problems. Matter of fact, now that I think about it, everybody has these problems except for me. And if that's what you're thinking, you are very clever. And what I'm trying to point out here is that people are the way people are, and we can waste a lot of energy expecting people to be logical, perfect, right, and listen to our facts. But the truth is, they don't. So what I try to do in the training, what I'm going to try to do before lunch and after lunch during my allotted time is I try to change the way that you think about things, because what we do at work is we have these and I'm going to talk about this after lunch, we have these beliefs about how things work and what's the right thing to do, and then we go to work kind of on autopilot running that tape in our head. So I am right now working with the way that you look at influence. So the first thing I tried to, and I try to tell it in a story that would cause you to hopefully remember it as time goes on. So if you can remember, the McDonald's case is the facts don't matter. I have got to stop trying to influence people by showing that I'm right, hoping they'll see that they're wrong. The second thing is, when people are annoying you, you try to have a positive attitude and you're like, well, that's how people are. And if that's how people are, I'm going to have to alter how I try to influence them. So I'm spending the first portion of my time trying to paint this picture of how influence really works, as opposed to how we wish it works. Then I'll spend the rest of my time talking about what are we going to do about it. And that's what the plan is. So, question, comment, complaint about my annoying personality characteristics, anybody? Anything? All right, if you don't say anything, I assume you're in complete agreement and happy. All right. So, third big idea is that conflict is underrated. And sometimes at work we feel like if there's conflict, we have failed. But what I'm suggesting to you is you want a fair amount of conflict at work, because there's only two systems of management that I could think of where you wouldn't have any conflict. One would be the leader is using the Vladimir Putin management style, which is essentially scare the hell out of everybody so nobody has an opinion, nobody says anything, and everybody does what the leader says. And the problem, yes, it keeps order, and yes, there's no conflict, but the problem is that if you scare your people, nobody says anything, and you have to be right every single time, which is why many people who use the Vladimir Putin management style end up, fired if they're at work, or swinging from a rope if they're running a country, right? Because eventually people get tired of it. Now, don't worry, there's another management style that has no conflict, and that is nobody cares. Right? And everybody just comes to work. I'm picking up a check. Yeah, kids need braces, got a mortgage. And they're sitting there at the meetings thinking about the weekend, not caring what it is that you're talking about. So I'm going to assume everyone in this room wants people to be engaged. If people are going to be engaged, they're passionate about the way they want things to be. They're passionate about their opinion. They want to be heard. There's going to be conflict. So positive attitude about, I think I have a summary slide here. So 3 big factors to deal with are facts and logic don't persuade people. Humans have good and bad tendencies. And then the last one is we want people to be engaged. We don't want to mail it in. So there's going to be some conflict and knocking of heads. So what is the solution? The solution is the approach of servant leadership, which I think goes hand in glove with my influence story that I am selling you this morning. So servant leadership, as you may know, the term was coined back in 1970. Robert Greenleaf read A Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse, which was written 100 years ago in German, translated to English. I felt like if I was going to show you this slide, I needed to read that book. So I read that book, but I'm a business professor. So I'm not going to lie to you, I felt like it was going over my head, and I wasn't completely getting what was going on with that journey across the desert there. So, fortunately, I read about it on Wikipedia, and now I think I know what's going on. Apparently it wasn't a real journey across the desert. It was our metaphorical journey of our life. And they had leaders who stood in front of the caravan and told people what to do, but it wasn't really very useful. What was useful is there was a servant named Leo, and Leo made sure people had help, camels had water, people had what they needed for the journey. And in the middle of the book, when Leo disappeared, the whole thing unraveled. So what he's trying to show us is what a real leader does is give us what we need to get the job done, and then get out of the way, right? And that is what the approach is. So why are you the leader? We're talking about why the why is important here pretty soon. I am the leader because I want the people I lead to be wealthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and I want you to help you become a leader as well. So I am asking you to do things because I think it's best for you, right? And that is why. So that in mind, this is going to go on and on here. I wanted to talk about the difference between authority and influence, because the servant leader is trying to influence people. The servant leader is trying to show you, because of my competence and commitment, you want to do what I want you to do. And of course, the authority leader is sort of the quintessential, movie military leader, not necessarily in real life, but the one who, I'm powerful, I'm strong, I have authority, therefore you need to do what I want you to do. And what I think is, humans really don't like authority. We think we do, but in fact, we don't. So I wanted to tell a story that illustrates this. Years ago, I was in this pattern of having a class every semester in one of the old science buildings here. It's since been renovated, but in the old days, it's hot outside, it's very hot in this old room. And I had 150 students jammed in there, and every semester when it heated up outside, the students said, open these doors, and there are these two double doors that open to the outside. And every semester I'd play this game. I'd walk over to the doors, I'd say, wait, there's a sign. And the sign was even more direct than that one. The sign said, these doors must remain closed, and must was in bold. And then it said, no exceptions, bold and underlined. Signed so-and-so, department head of chemistry. Right? Now, wouldn't you agree that's an authority sign? It says, keep the door closed, why? Because I said so. That's what authority is about, because I said so, right? So keep the door closed because I said so. So I would read the sign to the students. These doors must remain closed. No exceptions, bold and underlined. Signed department head. I said, but we live in a democracy, so we're going to take a vote. How many of you would like for me to open those doors anyway? How many hands do you think went up out of 150? No, it's always 149. There's always one dork in the back. I don't think we should, But 149 people, open those doors. No exceptions. What about a fire? Would that be okay? Department head of chemistry. What are you, commander-in-chief of all doors? It's an annoying sign, isn't it? Do you know why I say what the sign said twice? Because I like to watch your body language constrict a little bit. You didn't like the sign and you weren't even there, right? People don't like being told what to do at all, and it doesn't matter what your intent is. It matters how people perceive you. So when you're at work, you might think you're being nice, but you get a little stressed, maybe you're a little bit direct, and people perceive that you're telling them what to do. So what would the influence sign say, by the way? What would the first word be? Please. Keep this door closed. Is that good enough? What do you want to know? Why? Right? Because opening this door disrupts the entire heating and cooling system on campus. Thank you. And then the question is, how many people would vote to keep the door closed now? And the answer is everyone in this room has a different number, but it's always better than zero, right? So some people will respond to that sign. So what I'm selling you is that influence always works better than authority. That is the story that I am selling. And I don't expect you to buy it yet, so I'm going to go on and on here, because I want to create a tape that runs in your head and makes you believe this and use this for make your life easier and help you go up in the organization. So here's the story. I'm going to talk about an imaginary teenage daughter, but I want to point out this isn't really a teenage daughter. This teenage daughter symbolizes everybody at work. So we're going to play it out with the story with the teenager, but it is everybody at work. So you might say, why is it an imaginary teenage daughter? And the answer is because I have 3 boys, but I've been telling this story for longer than I've had children. So I have the story all smoothed up, and I don't want to change it. Now, people used to get irritated when I would talk about raising teenage daughters before I had my own kids. They're like, you don't know anything about it. And I'd say, well, I was a kid. They're like, that doesn't count, right? But now granted, I have kids and I realize it's somewhat of a disaster, and it's not as easy as I diagram it. A matter of fact, I think this story is not silly. I think there's something in this story to remember. I realized I was in trouble as a parent when my oldest son was 6 months old, and I'm trying to change his diaper, and he decides he doesn't want his diaper on. And my first reaction is, I am your big giant dad. I have authority. I'm jamming this diaper on. But as my wife would tell you, I'm not the greatest diaperer in the world. More on that in a second. So I would get this side, and then I couldn't get that side, and he'd do this little move where he kicked and twisted, and he could essentially cause me not to be able to get the diaper on. And I'm like, I'm going to jam it on, and pretty soon he'd start screaming and crying. And I was thinking to myself, how could a 6-month-old baby have such a strong opinion of diapers? And then I remembered it's a review question. People are annoying. They're born annoying. You start thinking about how children are. They could just do what you want. Stop screaming, okay. Eat your bananas. Okay, you know, they could do that, but they don't like being told to eat their bananas. They don't like the diaper going on. So I thought about what we're saying here. I'm like, and I'm trying to put the diaper on. He's like, starts twitching, and I'm like, all right, you don't want the diaper on? We won't have the diaper. I sing a couple of lines from a song, make a couple funny faces, give a nose kiss, diaper goes right on. That is influence. So I think it's wired into us. It's wired into human beings. We don't like being told what to do. So as a leader, we're trying to figure out how do you do it, right, without making people feel like we're telling them to do what they're trying to do. So I'm sitting in the living room, minding my own business. My imaginary 16-year-old daughter comes into the living room. Dad, spring break's coming up. 7 of us are driving to Vegas in Jimmy's dad's SUV. We're staying for a week. What's the answer? Yeah, that ain't happening. And she says, why? And you say, because I said so. You knew the line, the perfect use of authority, because I said so. And if you get any guff, come in with this. I am your father, and this is my house, and when you live in my house, you live by my rules. You could say that. Right? So here's what I think the problem is, the big problem is with influence. Again, it's a teenage daughter here, but it's people at work that we're really talking about. So at work, when you are trying to influence people, even just sending an email, making a quick phone call, seeing someone in a hall, when you are trying to influence people, do you look at it from their point of view, or are you only looking at it from your point of view? Because I think if you looked at it from their point of view, immediately you'd see this is a train wreck. So what exactly do you expect your teenage daughter to say in this case? Oh yeah, keep forgetting who the parent is. Thanks for reminding me. Keep forgetting who owns the house. Once again, thanks for reminding me. And by the way, the fact that you own the house makes perfect sense. You should control every aspect of my life. I mean, is that? And if that is not what you want them to say, I would argue nothing that you said was helpful whatsoever. So, if you looked at it from their point of view, you would ask yourself, what's going on with my teenage daughter? And if you're old enough, you know what's going on. Unfortunately, when you're as old as I am, you realize a lot of life is planning for things that just ain't happening. And this is one of them. And I would further say that planning for things sometimes is more fun than the actual thing. So if you, as I recently have, ever go on vacation with younger children, this is not a vacation, right? When you're planning, like, this is going to be great. We're going to the beach. We'll go to these nice restaurants. Then you get there, and you've got like nunchucks trying to keep the boys in the room and put them to bed, and you get back from vacation. It's like, my God, I need a vacation from my vacation. But it seemed like it was going to be good until it actually happened. And that's what a lot of life is, and that's what my daughter's doing with this trip to Vegas. So I say, tell me about this harebrained scheme. And I listen to the whole story because her and her friends have been having a great time. What does it mean at work? Before you say no, you listen to their idea. That's right, you give them a chance to speak. So I have her explain the idea, and then I say, wow, that is quite a plan you have. I know you hate when I just say no. I'll think about it, but don't get excited. This is a wild plan. She comes home from school the next day. Dad, have you decided? I'm still thinking. She comes home the next day. I say, you know what? Your mother and I, we love you. We trust you. We want you to have a good time. I would concede that you have been a particularly responsible young woman lately. However, Las Vegas is far away. Circumstances may arise for which your limited time on the planet have not prepared you to deal with. I am terribly sorry. We are going to have to pass on this opportunity. I didn't even say no. Her friends will be like, did you get to go? She'll be like, almost. It sounded like we might go there. There's the exit. Damn, just missed it. I thought we were going. And of course, the real business part of that story is it doesn't really matter what you say, it matters how you make people feel. So what I'm trying to do with my daughter is get as much respect, admiration, and trust as I can get. So I thought about it, and I told her that she was responsible and that she was a big girl. And now I know I'm not out of the woods, what my daughter's going to say, but Dad, I can take care of myself. And here is what every parent does. Oh, you can take care of yourself? I believe you forgot to bring your lunch to school on Tuesday, and I think your mother had to remind you your science project was due on Friday, and you left your bicycle in the front yard on Saturday night. I hardly think you're responsible. So what you're trying to do is explain to your daughter that she's not grown up enough to go to Vegas. What are the odds this is going to work? 0. So why are we doing it? I don't know, because we're thinking about it from our point of view instead of their point of view. So back to the real world. How many times at work do you stop and say, am I ever really going to convince them of this? Or am I really just getting a pile of respect, admiration, and trust and torching it? Right? And that might be what I'm doing. So looking at it from my daughter's point of view, here's what I'm going to say. She's going to say, but Dad, I can take care of myself. And now I'm really going off into the weeds. She's probably right. She probably would be okay if she went to Vegas. Think about this for a minute. If we sent 100 properly raised 16-year-old young women to Vegas, how many would we get back fundamentally unscathed? I say 95, right? You may say, where do you come up with that? I think these things through. 16-year-old properly raised young woman has the same level of maturity roughly as, what would you say, 32-year-old male? This is roughly the same level of maturity, at least, yeah. We have sent 132-year-old males to Vegas, got exactly 95 back, so we know the loss ratio on this level of maturity. And the interesting thing is, when I tell the story, like, I know if you're female, like, you know this story's true. Yeah, I would have been all right when I was 16. If you're male, you're like, that's no way in hell. Here's what I want you to think about when you're a male. When you were young, think of all the time you spent trying to convince women to get involved in bad ideas and how incredibly little luck you had with those schemes, right? So it probably would be okay if they went, but what I say to my daughter is, you're right. It's extremely likely you could take care of yourself in Las Vegas because you're a big girl and you're responsible. However, it's a small chance something could happen to you, and I care about you too much to let you go to Vegas. No, Dad, let me care too much. Dad, care too much. I turned the conversation from you can't take care of yourself to I care about you too much. And look, it's not about the teenage daughter. That's what the servant leader is. I want you to do this because it's good for you. I want you to respond to emails this way because I want people to be more receptive to your emails, and I want you to have my job someday. And if people can feel that, right, that is accumulating trust, admiration, and respect. That's not, right, telling people what to do. And that's how the servant leadership concept mixes in with this authority and influence concept. So, question now. Usually, I don't get past this point without someone saying, yeah, but. Come on, what is it? I'm ready. Yes, thank you.
Isn't some of this just ingrained in a person and can't be learned? Are some people more able to do what you're advocating than others?
Yeah, well, I think it is ingrained, but there's no question, right, that psychologists and management professors would tell us if we set our mind to it, we can change our grain over a period of time. But the first step is to understand and to want to. And then the second step is the commitment to remember. So what I'm really trying to get you to do is every time you send an email, pause, read the email, and ask yourself, if I was getting this email, and a lot of times you'd be like, ooh, right? And you'll put something friendly and you'll tone down the directness. Because I think the issue is that we don't think about it. And all I really have to do today is I have 2 hours to get you to buy into thinking about it. And when you think about it, you will have an incredible number of creative ideas to tone it the way you want it to be toned. And I think we just don't think about it. So here's probably just about everybody at your organization probably runs this scam, right? Tell me if your organization doesn't run this scam. If you have 15 people in a group and they have a leader and the leader gets promoted, you decide you're going to promote one of the 15 people to be the new leader. You say, well, if you want to be considered for leader, send us an email, and then we're going to have interviews. Scam. Why is it a scam? Because you already know who's going to get it, right? Why run the email? Why not just say, okay, so-and-so gets it, so-and-so's the winner. But somehow we get fooled into, well, I got my email, right? I'm sorry, I got my interview. Did I say interview the first time? You get an interview. So you've been there. So another thing I want you to think about is that you're influencing every single day. Right? So you influence every single day for 8 years. Now you apply for leader and you get an interview. What could you possibly say at that interview that's going to outbalance what I've seen for 8 years? If you promote me, I will start coming to work on time, doing my job and getting along with others. That's all we're not buying it. How about you do all those things before we promote you to leader? So we're influencing all the time, and that's another awareness that we could have. And I think when I say it today, you'll go, yeah, it's true, but when we watch people at work, they appear not to know it, right? Because influence is a long game. I got a call from one of those big energy companies in Houston. It may in fact be one of the companies that some of you are from. And I was down there having a great time, and they called me in a week, and we're talking about how it was going. And one of the questions they asked me was, well, what happens if your influence theory doesn't work? I said, oh, it always works. And they're like, no, seriously. I'm like, no, it always works. Because here is my analogy of how it always works. Most of you are close enough to Oklahoma to know that OSU's big football rival is OU. And you may know, if you follow football, that we lose that game about 9 out of 10 times, rounding in our favor. And the thing that's so frustrating about that game is every single year we lose for the exact same reason. And it's so frustrating. And that reason is at the end of the game, they've got more points than us. That is essentially what the problem is. But influence, what I'm saying with this story is the influence game never ends. So when you call me from Houston and say it didn't work, what I would tell you is it didn't work yet. Right? And what it really is how much respect, admiration, and trust can you accumulate. So when you have 15 people in a group and you're trying to figure out who to promote, you promote the one with the most respect, admiration, and trust. Right? You don't necessarily make the best engineer the leader of the engineers. That is actually a horrendous idea. You make the person with the people skills who is able to get along with people, motivate people, right? Being the manager, completely different job than doing the job. So it's an ongoing process. In all that, did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay, good. Sometimes I get carried away, as you can tell. Another question or comment, anybody? So I had to tell, this actually goes along with your question as well. I had to tell this story at Tinker Air Force Base about 40 times over a 2-year period, and I got to tell you, it's an authority-oriented group of people over there. Right? They kind of like authority more than, stick up for it at least more than you are sticking up for it. And what I found in reading about it and being there 40 times is that if you have grown up in an authority environment, you feel like without authority we will have chaos. Oh, you know the answer, right? So without authority we will have chaos is how people feel. Yet, when I did the example earlier, I said, if you want to keep the door closed, should you tell people, keep the door closed because I'm the department head, or what would a good influence sign say? What would the first word of an influence sign be? Please, keep this door closed. Is that good enough? Reason, because opening this door disrupts the entire heating and cooling system on campus. Thank you. And that's going to work better, right, than the authority sign. So I think influence always works better than authority. And they would kind of agree at Tinker Air Force Base, but then when you actually want them to get let loose of authority, they felt there's going to be chaos. So here is my story to try to alleviate your concern that without authority, we will somehow have chaos. So I'm switching from teenage daughters to teenage sons, and this time we're going to have 2 sons and 2 dads. We're going to have authority dad and influence dad. Both dads tell their son, be home at 11 p.m. sharp. Of course, both sons bop in 30 minutes late. Authority dad looks at his watch, you're 30 minutes late, you're grounded for 2 weeks. But dad, what does authority dad say? No buts, get to your room. And I'm down at Tinker, and they're like, yeah, that's how it goes, right? Everybody's excited. It's exactly how authority works. Get that kid to the room, right? Influence dad. Son, my watch says 11:30. Could there be something wrong with my watch? Or could there be some sort of daylight savings time that snuck up on me and you're in fact 30 minutes early? What am I doing? I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. Because is there anyone in this room who did not, both at work and at home, jump to a conclusion and then suddenly you're embarrassed? In other words, you thought there was a problem and there's something like, oh, that was embarrassing, right? So we can train ourselves slowly over time to try not to jump to conclusions. And he's like, no, Dad, what happened? Blah, 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 cell phone battery, blah, 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 right? And you go, well, you know, son, you've known me 16 years now, and as you know, my job is to train you up, so when I set you free at 18, you're a responsible member of society. As I've told you many times, in society, if you're not responsible, there are consequences. So as your father, I have to give you consequences when you're irresponsible, so you learn, I am terribly sorry, you're grounded for 2 weeks. And I tell that story at Tinker, and it was like, what? Right? Because in their mind, and this is the big thing for some people, is in their mind, you're either tough or you're lax. And what people hear when I talk about this is, you've got a continuum of authority over here and influence over here, and I just have to balance myself and not be too authoritative. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about a completely different continuum, right? Where there's the kind of person who everybody wants to make them happy. They're just being themselves, and they have such a magnetic personality that people want them to be happy, do a good job, right? And what the rest of us do, if you're not born that way, is we spend our whole life trying to walk towards that point. And the way you do it is by accumulating trust, admiration, and respect. So the son says, but Dad, I'll listen again, blah, 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 blah. After listening to the second part of your argument, in my opinion, it doesn't cover any new ground. Terribly sorry. The sentence stands. You're grounded for 2 weeks. And here's where the big punchline of this story comes. What is authority's son thinking while he sits in his room? What was that?
Mad at Dad.
He's mad at Dad. Hate my dad. Dad's a jerk. Or he might even come up with this. I'll show him. Put me down for this. I don't want anybody to show me anything, right? I want people to be happy, and I want to find out things for myself. So if you look at the statistics, right, and anybody's HR department, I'm sure, can show you, but a lot of people in the workplace could be substantially happier than they are, right? And some of it comes from how the way we tell people what to do, right? How it is. We tell people what to do. We don't necessarily look at it from their point of view. So I thought I should point out, when I tell the story, I am afraid that you would get the idea that I am somehow an above average parent and that there is order in my house. And I would tell you that is absolutely not the case. It is a freewheeling circus. And the problem is when I'm here, there are no children, so it's easy to diagram the plan, right? Like everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, then the whole thing falls apart. But I try to remember. So I was doing this just earlier this week, and someone said, my child texts me and says, can I have a soda? And it's the afternoon before dinner. And and the dad texts back, no, wait till dinner, right? He goes, do you want me to make a big production out of that? I'm like, well, you could say, I care about your health, so we have 1 soda a day at dinner, right? That's just a different way of saying it. You still don't let them have the soda. So here's an example of how hard it is. I was going out in public when my oldest son was about 8, and he comes downstairs with his shirt off, and we're going out in public. I'm not the kind of dad who calls his kids dude unless his shirt off. So I said, dude, where is your shirt? He's like, I'm not wearing a shirt. I'm like, you have to wear a shirt. Why? What did I want to say? Because I said so, but I just told you can't say that. So I was trying to think, family policy. We always wear shirts. And then he comes in with, the state of Oklahoma does not require males to wear shirts in public. I'm not wearing a shirt. I said, all right, what else do I have? And admittedly, this wasn't the greatest thing to tell an 8-year-old, but I said, all right, see, the problem is only criminals go out in public without their shirt on. That's what I told him. So he gets his shirt on, and then in my world, it never ends. Like within a week, look, Dad, criminals, right? Because people are walking without a shirt on. Then he starts thinking about, Dad, why don't they just arrest everybody with their shirt off? Like, well, it wouldn't bother me, but there's these constitutional rights involved. So it seems like a little more work, but in the long run, you're hopefully making an investment. Because think back to when you're a kid and think about it at work. When you're trying to decide how good of a job should I do, should I take a shortcut or not? When you're a teenager, should I do this thing or not? Part of the decision making was, how much do I not want to disappoint my parents, right? It was a factor that weighed in. So the people who work for you are much like teenagers. They are off on their own a lot, and you don't know what they're doing. And what they do will be impacted by how much trust, admiration, and respect they have for you. All right, I'm finished with this finally. Last chance for questions, comments, or complaints about this one. Anybody? Yeah.
So I've heard the same similar talk about influential dad and the what'd you call it? The
Authority dad and influence dad, right.
So far as to explain, like statistically, being out after dark, and how far do you have to go to kind of, would you go to not make it yourself authoritative, or the reason why we have 11 o'clock rule, here's, after midnight, statistically, these bad things happen, and yada, 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 yada. So it's not just me and complete your case, but just curious how there seems to be a continuum or a line you have to go before you prove your case or whatever.
Well, if I understood what you're asking me, let me give you an answer and tell me if I hit it or not. One thing that makes me nervous, and what I was trying to show in the comparing the two dads, is that there is absolutely no difference in the decisions that you make and the rules that you have at work or at home, whether you're authority dad or influence dad. It's just how you do it, right? The influence son got grounded for 2 weeks, right? The influence son had to be home at 11 o'clock. And what I think we get in our brain, it seems like it's either authority or lax. Right? So what we're trying to convey to the people who work for us, or children, in your question, is it's about servant leadership. I care about you, which is why, and I care about the organization, which is why I'm asking you to do this. It's not a power trip for me. It's not because I have the power and authority. It's because I'm committed to the organization and I'm committed to you. So with the child, most of you in this room probably grew up having a fair amount of trust, admiration, and respect for your parents, even through the darkest days of your teenage years, right? Somehow your parents, kept it up. And it doesn't mean you can't yell at people, it doesn't mean you can't get upset, but it's an overall feeling that we get. Why, in response to Susan's question, I talked about how we're influencing all the time. Was that an answer to your?
I think it doesn't matter what tools you bring to bear to develop that trust, admiration.
Right. Different things for different people even. We don't have time to go into that, but right, different things would be respected in, we have a manager here at OSU whose management style is to try to make everyone happy. And every time this manager makes one person happy, everyone else gets unhappy, and it's not working. Right? So that's not an effective strategy. So it's not about making people happy. A lot of times about saying no and telling them the reason. Managers do stuff like this. You'll have 15 people, you send an email, everybody needs to make sure they come to work on time. And everyone's like, what? Stevie's the one who's late every day. Why are you sending emails to all of us? Why don't you get off your butt, walk over and tell Stevie? Because Stevie gets here late and doesn't answer his email, right? So by sending that email to everybody, you're lessening your respect, admiration, and trust for everybody, right? Because you won't go tell one person, Stevie, I care about you. I want you to have a job. You need to get here on time. And they don't want to have that conversation, so they try to tell everybody. Is that a fair answer? Anybody else that was a good one. Anybody else have one? Sure.
So I totally understand and get influencing if you're trying to be a proactive leader, drive change, or sell an idea. And I understand trying to make everyone happy. But what if from your leadership side, if you're reacting to an action, and let's say this action has a much higher magnitude than your 8-year-old kid without his shirt on, mistake with $1 billion asset, or losing $1 million a day, or injury, or something like that. How do you be influential with that, because you're really reacting and trying to correct?
Yeah, well, I think that if you're asking me, is it okay to yell at people? If that's what you're asking me, I would say the answer is yes, because a lot of people in the military, a lot of coaches, probably a lot of people in the entertainment industry and probably in the energy industry, there's probably a fair amount of yelling that goes on, just because, and it may even be strategic to show people how upset you are, but it's, the question would have been, what happened before those 6 months? Right? That's what would, I've got yelled at, I understand I made $1 billion mistake. I understand people are upset, but how was it the 6 months before then? Because if we're in the military and I'm the lieutenant of our platoon, and now we've got to run up this hill and get shot at, how I treated you the last 6 months before we run up the hill will impact what you think when you're running up the hill. And if I was supportive and it was a servant leadership thing, you will hopefully be running up the hill thinking, if we all do our jobs, we'll come down safely. If, on the other hand, I've been a jerk, and I've been standing under an umbrella while I made you do push-ups in the mud, we're going to run up the hill, and you're going to be thinking, I hope someone shoots Andy, so we can all run back down the hill, right? So when the big crisis happens, the real answer is what was going on for the 6 months before. You will be excused for reacting. You will be excused for getting excited. You will be able to demonstrate how upset you are about a $1 billion mistake, and it won't, right? It will be accepted because they know, based on the whole relationship, that you care about me and that this is about the mistake, not another pattern of you not caring about me. So that's why we're influencing all the time. Great question. Anybody else? Yes?
Just one more. On your engineer example, you've also got competence on that other slide. I mean, how important is competence in
The competence of the job?
Well, of the person to be that leader too. Like, we've had situations where you've got a good leader with no competence and can't seem to lead those people because the people don't think that.
Right. Yeah, so, well, let me back up a little bit and tell you something interesting about engineers. In my job in the business school right now is I teach people skills to the business people, and it's now a required class in our core. Everybody graduating will have a class in people skills. Every once in a while, an engineer wanders into this class, and they end up sitting in the front row, staying after class asking me questions. And I can't tell you why engineers, and I've gone to energy companies in a room full of engineers to talk about people skills, and my anecdotal evidence is engineers, at least younger engineers, are infinitely more interested in learning people skills than business majors whose only job is to have people skills. So I don't know what it is. So I found engineers to be very responsive when I come in the room and tell this story and other kinds of stories that we have about the importance of developing their people skills. That said, the engineer with the best people skills would make the best manager unless they weren't respected for their competence, right? So that you need a level of competence. You don't have to be the best engineer, but there's also an interesting article, The 7 Transformations of Leadership. There's this personality called the expert, and the expert believes in being right and doing things the right way, and they get very irritated when we're doing something for expediency, or we only have this much money, so we're not doing a perfect job, and they get very irritated at those kinds of things. So there's 2 possibilities. One is I would only promote someone who had enough competence to be respected, because that's part of it. But on the other hand, these experts believe the biggest expert should be promoted, and they all believe they are the biggest expert, right? And that also creates conflict in that environment. So I love to get in the room full of experts and try to make them see it's not about being an expert. You start wanting to go way up in the organization. It's, think about what the leaders at the tops of these organizations, you lead, you influence people. You may never even shake hands with them. But the way you speak at meetings and the stories that are told about you cause people to want to do a good job and to buy into your big plan, right? So leading from way above becomes, a very a big effort of being able to create trust, admiration, and respect from afar, not even one-on-one. Is that a fair answer to? Good one, yeah.
This all seems downward oriented, but what about trying to influence the behavior of the leaders?
Yeah.
That's another area problem.
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing when someone who works for me comes in to talk to me. How much I pay attention depends on how much trust, admiration, and respect I have for them, right? So it's the same game. You might accumulate it in a different way, but we accumulate trust, admiration, and respect so that our leader will listen to our ideas and respect our ideas. Right? And, it's different ways of doing that. We have only 2 hours, but it's the same game. That's why I use the teenager. It's the game with the teenager, it's the game with the spouse, the game with your boss's boss, and the people below your subordinates. We are trying to figure out what would accumulate trust, admiration, and respect with them. Don't gossip, right? I am honest in reporting the problems that have gone on, right? I think about what I have to say to my manager to accumulate trust, admiration, respect. Don't look happy with the answer.
I'm just thinking.
Okay.
I never look happy when I'm thinking.
Okay. I'm glad you're thinking. Anybody else? see how we're doing here. When did we start? 10:15, right? We're about an hour in. Is that about right? Okay. I have time for a couple more questions if anybody has one. All right, let's see what's next. So here's a book I found kind of interesting. It's called Give and Take by Adam Grant. He's a Wharton professor, and he characterized people's personalities or maybe leadership styles, approach to work as takers and givers. And takers were essentially the authority people. They were very dominant. They tried to seize power, assert their authority. They promoted their accomplishments, and that was, that was kind of that authority style of leader. And then there was this giver, and the giver's style was prestige. So in response to Christopher's question, you accumulate prestige with your manager, and they're more likely to listen. So the giver is not sure. Right? And if you think about it at work, isn't it annoying when someone is positively, absolutely sure that they're right? Right, so wouldn't it be better if someone, if you said, if Anna said to me, I think this idea is better, and I said, well, Anna, my idea is better, so let's do my idea. That's more offensive than, Anna, maybe you're right, but I can't risk it this time, so please, let's do my idea. There's nothing, it's a little bit insecure. So I get these weird jobs periodically, and years ago I was going to Peoria, Illinois to do image consulting for a law firm. And this guy walked up to me and said, hey, thanks for coming. I'd like to introduce you to one of our best lawyers. We call him the Hammer. I'm like, all right, where is he? He goes, you're looking at him. Right? And he was the Hammer, and he spoke about himself in the third person. And he would raise his hand. Now, the Hammer likes to tell people this. When the Hammer's negotiating, he does that. That's how he talks. He talks about himself in the third person. And the Hammer, of course, was a huge taker. And the question is, when you go to negotiate with the Hammer, what do? Well, a lot of us bring our own hammer. And if you're like me, I will cut off my nose to spite my face just so the Hammer doesn't win. That's what I would do. So what happens is, and what the research from Give and Take was, over time, right? It's not that takers don't win, but on average, if you look at successful people, there are many more givers than there are takers. So you can win taking, but it's easier to win giving. And the other thing the book found is, and this makes perfect sense, over time, the giver is accumulating trust, admiration, and respect, and the taker is losing trust, admiration, and respect. So the longer the game is played, the more likely the giver is to win. I know a lot of you who are mid-career, you probably notice nice things that you did 7 years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, suddenly something good happened, right? And that is because you were a giver in that case. So a question about that concept.
Talk a little bit more about the doubt.
Yeah, so the doubt is tricky, and it was really what I was doing here with Anna. It's like, you listen to other people and you're trying to figure out if you're right. Ultimately, you get to make the decision in the end, but you don't come to the meeting. How many times, if we're having a meeting and I'm the decision maker and you say something and I'm like, no, we're not doing that. And you're like, who would want to give an idea if an idea is dismissed that quickly? So I would genuinely consider your ideas. And another thing I would say, Tony, in response to your question that kind of comes in here as well, is really what this is a mindset. And if your mindset is that I'm a servant leader and I'm going to listen to people, right? We're not playing a game, we do listen to people, right? So you listen to their idea before you dismiss it, right? Is that? Yeah. So it's you reveal your weaknesses, you are willing to not be perfect, you own up to, when you own up to a mistake, generally respect, admiration, trust goes up, right? If you make a mistake, that's a small problem. If you refuse to acknowledge it's a mistake, that's a big problem. So they're willing to admit that they make mistakes. And the interesting thing is, which is I think ironic, is weak people tend to be takers, because they're not strong enough to admit they don't know everything and that they might be wrong and they've made mistakes in the past. It actually takes a stronger person to sit in front of the people you lead and say, I'm not sure. So that's kind of ironic, because it seems like the taker is the tougher person. But really, the Hammer was an insecure person. and the hammer strategy is not working. I think the other lesson to take away from the hammer is we probably shouldn't make up our own nickname.
Is the doubt kind of self-deprecating humbleness that thing?
Yeah, I think there's a balance of humble and then losing confidence. You can't be so humble that people don't have confidence in you, yet you can't be so arrogant that people won't think you have their position. So you can be confidently questioning, right? I'm confident we're going to win. I'm confident we will get the right idea, but I'm not sure what the right idea is right now. Because you can be. There was another kind of giver who is too worried about pleasing other people, and they tended to come in last. And those were givers who were concerned with others without being concerned for themselves. So you're a giver not just because you care about other people, because you care about other people and you care about yourself, and you realize, if I care about other people, I'm going to win too. So you're in it for yourself and for them both. Great, that helped explain. Anybody else? Okay, let's see what's next. So I said we're going to spend our first hour talking about the way influence is. We're going to spend our second hour talking about what we're going to do about it. So what we're going to try to do is what I talked about with Susan. We become aware of our influence opportunities and more conscious and more deliberate in making a plan to respond. So before you send an email, pick up the phone, whatever it is, we're going to make a plan, and then here is the plan. So I'm going to introduce it, and then I'm going to give a silly example which hopefully sticks with you so you can remember it and take it with you in the tape that runs in your head. So the first big idea is we've got to connect with people. If we're not connected, they're not going to listen. And it seems very obvious. If they're not listening, it doesn't matter what you say. But a lot of times, how many times at work are you talking? And if you really thought about it, the person you're talking to isn't listening. But we keep on talking. So we're going to connect so that they will listen. And there's, I do a lot of work with internal auditors, so I'm going to use internal audit as an example. I don't want to know if there's any internal auditors here or not. It's an okay story. And if you are an internal auditor, I think you'll like it. If you're not, you'll get what I'm talking about. So the internal auditors show up in your little group. And how many of you say, hot damn, the internal auditors are here. This will be rewarding. Right? And the answer is not. So what ends up happening is we feel like the internal auditors are here to catch us and to get in trouble. But if you are an internal auditor, you know that internal auditor is a very important job because there are so many fines and so many lawsuits and so many risks we can be that our real job is to try to run around the organization and make sure we're complying with all these regulations and legal requirements and that we know what our risks are. So to connect, the internal auditor would try to figure out, how do I show people, right, that I'm not here to get them in trouble and I'm not just checking up on people. I'm here to help you do your job and comply with all these things. And when you do that, you make the connection. And if you're just doing your job, you just show up and act like an internal auditor. But if you're thinking about it, you take a little bit of time to connect and to be friendly and try to explain exactly what it is you're trying to do. Because everybody in the organization has a different point of view, and the points of view can clash. And I can show you simply this way. If you're driving on a 2-lane road and the speed limit is 55, how fast are you supposed to go? I heard 60. I think that's the right answer, and I go 60. So if I'm going 60, guy in front of me has a different point of view. He goes 55. Too many cars coming to pass, mile after mile of going 55 and a 55. It's like I may never get there. Finally, they pull off. I'm back to going 60. Someone passes me doing 65. Now what am I thinking? Lunatic's going to kill somebody, right? So we all see things from our point of view, so the connecting is trying to match up our points of view. Then I ask what's in it for them, and that's also the looking at it from the standpoint of the other person, kind of like we did with the teenage daughter. And then to be the persuasive messenger, it's behavior, attitude, and if we don't know them very well, appearance. So I have hundreds of students every semester and don't get to know them, but they come in to see me in my office to tell me their sad stories, and I have to decide who's telling me the truth and who's not telling me the truth. So it's hard not to judge by appearance because, some kids come in and they've got a big t-shirt, looks like they're wearing pajamas. You think you can see pillow marks on their cheek. You may judge them unfairly. So I actually have a little bit of empirical research now because for the first 11 years I was a professor, I can't believe it, but we had paper grade books We'd write their things down in pencil, add them up, and divide them. And back then, whenever a student told me, I'm missing a test because of a grandparent's funeral, you always wonder, it's kind of awkward because it might be true, but you wonder, is it true? So I always let them make up the test. I never look into it, but I always put a mark in the grade book because I said, someday I'm going to look into this because I'm curious. I never did until we switched from paper grade books to computer grading, and I gave this big stack of grade books to my graduate assistant and said, I'm terribly sorry, but would you tally that up? I've always been curious. Here's what we found. You might be interested. Here's what we found. If your grade in my class is a D or an F, your grandparents are 16 times more likely to die on test day than if you have an A or a B. Isn't that amazing? It's like doing well in my class literally keeps your grandparents alive. Life insurance companies should check the grades before selling life insurance to grandparents, right? Because apparently there's a very high correlation. So what I tend to do is look at people's grades, and I assume if you have an A or B, you're telling me the truth, and D or an F, you're not. But everybody has their way of doing it. So let me get to the silly story. Instead of introducing it, we'll get right to work. So years ago, I got 2 speeding tickets in a 2-week period for the exact same percentage over the speed limit. I live in Tulsa, obviously I work in Stillwater, and I got a 66 in Manford, which is in between here, and then I got a 77 and a 65 in Payne County, which is the county that we're in right now. So I made a bet with a management professor here in Stillwater. I'm using my 5-step process to quote unquote get out of the speeding ticket. That was the story that I was selling. So step 1 is, how do we connect with the judge? What's in the way? So one good way to connect is, I'm the internal auditor, I'm going to get you in trouble. With the judge, what do you think is standing in the way of the judge listening to me? Anybody have an idea? What do you think the judge is going? Do you think the judge has an open mind about my guilt? No. We learn in high school you're innocent until proven guilty, but what does the judge think? Yeah, you're guilty. We don't go out in society, accuse people of crime, running through the system just to see if it works, right? The judge thinks I'm guilty. Think the judge is going to believe me? Probably not. So they're not going to believe me, and their mind's made up against me. It seems like a tough case, but wouldn't you agree, all of you face that every week at work. You try to influence people whose mind's made up and they're not inclined to believe you. So that's why the system is not about speeding tickets, it's about work. We try to figure out how to connect. If we figure out what's in the way, right, then we can connect. Second thing is, what's in it for the judge? Anybody? By finding that I'm not guilty, nothing in it for the judge, right? So if there's nothing in it for them, the biggest thing is always in there, and that's appreciation, and you're going to watch me appreciate the judge. Third thing, behavior, attitude, and appearance. I have good attitude, good behavior, and I'm worried about my appearance because I've never seen this judge before. What should I wear to court? Because what we wear influences others. What should I wear? I thought about wearing a suit, but since I was a lawyer, I felt like I might look like a lawyer, and I felt like this might not be the time to look like a lawyer. So I started with what not to wear, and I thought, I'm not wearing my NASCAR jacket. I think that sends the wrong message when you're arguing speeding ticket. So I decided to wear what I consider to be the most truthful and reliable of all garments. You know what I'm talking about, khaki pants. I expected a bigger reaction. Khaki pants is the official uniform of credibility. Let me explain. Let me digress for a couple of minutes. So I have a nephew who was living in Washington State. He was behaving and flunking his way out of junior year of high school. So the family had a meeting and decided he should come and live in my house for senior year, and that as his uncle, I would coach him and make sure he made it to high school graduation. So some people are curious, which is the only reason I'm saying this. He is from my wife's side of the family, just so you know. So my nephew comes to stay with us, and I say, nephew, I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm very excited. I'm going to give you 2 weeks to settle in. Then you need to get a job. And he looked at me with great horror. And I said, I know. No one in your family's ever had a job before, but it's not as bad as they say. And if you want to get a job when you're 17, right, and you don't have a driver's license, if I were you, I would get a job at Subway because it's only about 70 steps from our front door, a very short walk, and it's the kind of job that 17-year-olds get. And if you want a job at Subway, all you need to do is walk over there to fill out the application wearing khaki pants. Wouldn't you agree? If you're running a Subway, some kid shows up in khaki pants, maybe he can start right now. This is a good kid. What do you think they have? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I hope to work up to lettuce. It's not that. It's khaki pants, start working right now. And of course, if you doubt my story, guess what my nephew said? I don't wear khaki pants. Like, what do you mean you don't wear khaki pants? We'll just pull them on, get a belt, make sure they don't fall off. And he's like, no, I don't wear khaki pants. What does he wear? Yeah, he wears jeans. Either too tight or too loose, right? And the problem with jeans is, good people wear jeans, but evil people wear jeans. And you can't tell just by looking whether they're good or evil, but only good people wear khaki pants. I was somewhere on vacation, and wait a minute, my nephew also wears graffiti sneakers, and then the worst of all things, flat-billed baseball hat, also known as the unemployment hat, right? That hat says don't hire me at Subway. So I'm somewhere on vacation, and my wife said, who's that strange man hanging around the playground where our children are playing? I'm like, don't worry, he's wearing khaki pants, right? There's nothing to worry about. I was in Edmond, which for those of you out of town is a big suburb of Oklahoma City, big suburb, and the chief of police was there. And the chief of police looked like he was 65 years old. And I asked him afterwards, I said, Chief, in your entire police career, have you ever arrested someone wearing khaki pants? And he said, I can't recall that I have. I said, how about someone with their shirt off? He said, every day, right? So it comes out the way we think that it does. So I'm going to court wearing khaki pants, tweed sport coat. Wouldn't you agree nothing says truth like tweed with elbow patches, right? Shiny is sneaky. What's the opposite of shiny? Tweed. Slows things down. Out of style necktie to signal I'm from the old days, right? I'm going to tell the truth. I need to look like I'm telling the truth. So next up is don't create conflicts and confrontations, right? Because we don't run from them, because from engagement we get them, but we sure don't start them. So my brother and I are opposites, as brothers sometimes are. I am a professor who lives in the United States. He is an IT guy who lives in Sweden. And you may ask, why does your brother live in Sweden? The answer is, he's irritated everyone in America, is pretty much why he had to move to Sweden. And here's how it would play out with the judge. Judge said to me, speeding is the biggest problem facing America today. I would quickly think, who knows more about this, me or the judge? The judge. What are the odds I'm going to change her mind? 0. I understand, Your Honor. Here's what my brother would say. Speeding? What, are you kidding me? How about crime and terrorism? You ever think of that? Huh? Guilty? Right? He starts an argument, everything, and Susan could ask, is that in our nature? And I would say, yes, that is in our nature, right? Some of us tend to be very agreeable, some of us tend to be very argumentative, and what we try to do as a result of today is we try to, you tone down the problematic part and play up the positive part. So I told you earlier the facts don't matter, but I always want to make sure that you understand that of course the facts matter. The point is the facts alone won't win the day. Right? So we want to make sure our facts are the facts, because we lose trust, admiration, and respect if it turns out what we're saying is not the truth. So I looked up speeding in the statute, see if there's loopholes, no loopholes. I called the smartest lawyer in Stillwater, Oklahoma for advice. She said, I'll give you advice, give up. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, you don't live here, so you don't know, but everyone in Stillwater knows that the judge doesn't change tickets. If you got the ticket in the city limits, you could go argue, but you got it in the county, so you're going to have to go to court with the felons and the misdemeanors. That judge never changes tickets. She yells at people. No one's going to be there for traffic except for you, because everybody knows. So I would have given up, but I made a big bet, and I have a stubborn nature. So I went off to court with my khaki pants and my tweed sport coat, and I sat there almost 3 hours. All the felons were arraigned, all the misdemeanors, and sure enough, we get to traffic, as promised, only 2 of us. And she looked at the 2 of us, she called the other guy's name and started yelling. She said, I don't change tickets. Everybody knows I don't change tickets. Only under the most bizarre circumstances would I consider it. Plead guilty or not guilty, but don't waste my time. He said, guilty. Then she called my name and said, didn't you hear what I told the other gentleman? I said, I did, Your Honor. And when you mentioned bizarre circumstances, you gave me a ray of hope. I said, now, Your Honor, I've come here today expecting to plead not guilty, but after seeing all the important matters you have, I don't want to waste your time. I'll plead guilty if you want me to, but if you would give me 2 minutes to explain my extenuating circumstances, I promise I'll be satisfied with your decision. Humanly impossible not to listen to me. Wouldn't you agree? I'm being very polite. and I'm wearing khaki pants, right? There is no way not to say. So she gave me the 2 minutes. I said, now, Your Honor, first thing I'd like to show you is I have another speeding ticket, not just this one I got in your county. And I showed her the other speeding ticket. And this was years ago, before she would have been able to see it on any sort of computer, but judges don't do that anyway. But the reason I showed her the other speeding ticket is because what was in the way of connecting was trust, that she wasn't going to trust me for telling the truth. And ironically, right, we build trust by speaking against our interests. So when I own up to mistakes, people trust me more. So I say, look, Your Honor, I have another speeding ticket. So she might think I'm a chronic speeder, but at least she knows I'm honest. I said, now, Your Honor, I'm very upset about these 2 speeding tickets. At that time, I've lived in Oklahoma about 10 years, and I've never even had a parking ticket because I consider myself to be a law-abiding citizen, and I'm sure people make a lot of claims, so I've gone to the tag agency. I bought a copy of my driving record, which I'd like to show you, clean. And then I said, now, Your Honor, about 6 weeks before these 2 tickets, my car was involved in an accident. And I don't want you to think I'm a bad driver. Here is the police report. And if you see on there, Your Honor, I wasn't even in my car. My car was parked on the street. Someone ran into the front end of my car. $7,000 damage done to the front end of my car, Your Honor. Here's a receipt from the insurance company and the body shop showing you that that's true. I said, now, Your Honor, here's what I think happened. After 10 years, not even a parking ticket, suddenly my car is involved in an accident. I get my car back. I get 2 speeding tickets in a 2-week period for the exact same percentage over the speed limit. Clearly, my speedometer was damaged in that accident. And here is a letter from a mechanic telling you my speedometer was damaged. Now, that letter was from a mechanic. Who happened to be a student in my class, yes. But we checked the speedometer. I don't know if you know the official way to check the speedometer is you go out on the highway and drive next to the tow truck. So when I was in the 55, I was going 60 just like you're supposed to. Tow truck said 66, I got a ticket. Then when it said 65, I'm driving 70 just like you're supposed to. I get a ticket for 77. The judge rolled her eyes and said, I will let you out of this ticket, just don't tell anybody. Right? So obviously I told you. I've been telling people for over 20 years. We added it up a few years back. I've told over 50,000 people the story of the speeding ticket. And of course, given my nature, I'm down in Oklahoma City bragging. I've told 50,000 people. And that's when someone chooses to raise his hand and say, that judge is my mother. So now, she knows I've told over 50,000 people. So it's a silly story. It's a silly story, but it tries to make the serious point. If I hadn't gone through the process, if I hadn't been conscious and tried to think, how do I connect, look at it from her point of view, which is applying the teenager story, right? Be the kind of person with my behavior, my attitude, and my appearance in this case, and I didn't start any arguments with her. I think I needed that to get out. And then after she, was done, I said, Your Honor, may I have my evidence back? And she said, you're going to use that evidence in Manford, aren't you? And I said, well, it worked so well this morning. Manford is on my way home. And then in Manford, they apologized for that little speed trap they're running there, and we're very impressed with my evidence as well. Right? So it's a silly story, but the idea is that if you remember the story, you remember the 4 things, you try to use those things. We've got about a half an hour left, and what I'm going to do is go through those, spend the rest of our time kind of going in more depth about the first 4 of those factors. But I will pause for a question or a comment or a complaint.
Did your nephew ever work in Subway? Or buy khaki pants?
Oh, so I forgot how the story ended. Right. So of course he kept wearing his jeans to show me I'm wrong, even though I'm his uncle. And I spent the whole time trying to build up the trust, admiration, and respect with him over time. And he kept getting further from home. And then I was out of town on a business trip. He put on his khaki pants, got a job at Goldie's, and did graduate from high school. And then sent him down to OSU Muskogee to kind of go to trade school. And without my hourly supervision, he exploded. And we sent him back to Washington, but he's out of jail and has a job. So I'm a high school graduate with a job out of jail. I'm taking a partial victory on that. So I don't take any credit, but I was able to make sure he made it to the end. Sent him to Boy Scout camp in that big famous one in New Mexico.
Philmont.
Yeah, Philmont. And he had a job there. And because if you're his uncle, like, where could I put my son, my nephew, where he won't get in trouble? Boy Scout camp in New Mexico in the middle of nowhere? Got fired. He saved up a lot of money from Goldie's, went to Vegas with these knuckleheads and blew everything he made at Goldie's. So he needed to live right by me, is what he was fine when he was near me. He just had to have a little bit of a leash. But yeah, it's okay. It was 7 years ago, so he's still okay. Yes?
So how much money did you save by getting out of tickets?
Oh, much smaller than the amount of time it took me, if that's what you're getting at. When I was younger, and I'm getting old and I'm actually disappointed in myself, but when I was younger, every situation that arose, I would try to turn it into a story. So I would argue with people, I would go to small claims court, I would go to their house, I would go to headquarters to talk to the president, because to me, stories are fascinating. So I would try to have everything I did turn into a story. So that's why I did it, because I thought it would be fun. So, but yes, it was it's a colossal waste of time. Yeah. And by the way, when I did get a speeding ticket, and it was just my fault, I just paid it, right? Because if I didn't have a story, I didn't just argue everything. So, another question. All right, so let's look at this connecting. So here's the thing about my new job. I try to teach people skills to business students, and their parents are excited. Employers are excited. Donors are excited. The students are not excited, right? I don't know why business students aren't interested in people skills, but they're not that interested in it. And if you listen when I'm not around, they say, all I teach them to do is suck up and sell out. That's what their view of people skills is. So before I argue with them, I say, depends on what you mean by sucking up, because if this is sucking up, I'm for it. Standing in my front yard, minding my own business, my neighbor comes over. Excuse me, my neighbor comes over and says, Andy, I just got back from a 3-week vacation to Manford, Oklahoma. Do you want to see my vacation pictures? What's the answer? Really? No. I'm a boy, I don't look at my own vacation pictures, right? But what do I say? Sure, I'll have a look, right? And I flip through the pictures, say what a lovely family, who knew Manford was such a lovely vacation destination. Then you show me your baby picture or your grandbaby picture. Without even looking at the picture, I can tell you what I'm going to say. That is the cutest baby I have ever seen. Am I lying? No. I'm a boy, all babies look alike. Technically, they're tied for first, right? So every baby is the cutest baby I've ever seen. And the punchline of the story is that it's not what you say, it's how you make people feel. And if you are, like my students, someone who has to be real, and their baby has a lumpy head, right? I don't think you have to say, wow, that baby has a lumpy head to the parents. They know it has a lumpy head. You could find something positive like, what beautiful eyes your lumpy-headed baby has, right? Or whatever the case may be. But the sentiment is true if the words are not exactly. So I brought a picture of Donald Trump, and to be honest with you, I didn't remember that I did that. So let me see if I can get out of this slide without offending more than 4 people. That is going to be my goal. So Simon Sinek wrote another great book that I would recommend if you haven't read it. A lot of people have, but it's called Start With Why. And the big premise of his book is that people care very, very much about why you are doing something. So when we're influencing someone, why do you want me to do it? Why do you want me to do it? Why won't you let me go to Las Vegas? Why do you want me to check the work again? Why do you want me to stay late and finish this project? People want to know, you wanted to know why the door has to be closed. So your why for influence is that you're a servant leader and you are serving the organization and serving the people. And if people can feel that's your why because you've adopted that as your why, then it works very well. So what Simon Sinek points out is that trust is not logical. So that doesn't mean that either one of those candidates are right or wrong. What it only means is people will trust that candidate based on a feeling, not based on the facts. Which also means people will trust you without regarding to the facts. So you can't logically make somebody trust you, and you can't logically talk someone out of trusting someone. So you probably have in your extended family some family member or relative who trusts somebody they should not trust. And no amount of conversation can cause them to stop trusting that person. So and this is a tricky slide because I'm showing you this because I don't want you as down-to-earth, genuine people to think that, well, as long as I do a good job and as long as I use the facts, people will trust me because trust is disconnected from that. So it comes from the limbic system, a part of the brain that doesn't even think in words. So trust comes from the same area of the brain as love, Love can't be put into words. Like, how do you describe love in words? Poets have been trying for 2,000 years. Ask me, why do you love your wife? I love my wife because she's funny. If I found someone funnier, would you love her more? Maybe. I mean, no, right? That's what the answer is, right? But you can't, it's just a feeling that you have, and trust is just a feeling that you have. So if you're aware of that, you now know I can't get trust through logic and facts. I have to get trust through perhaps servant leadership, right? Commitment and competence and those kinds of things. So in his book, Simon Sinek, right, points out that the company of Apple and Harley are examples of companies that have a big why. So if you have an iPhone or a Mac or things like that, you do iTunes, like me, you probably love Apple and you feel emotionally connected to Apple. And when we go to the Apple store at the mall, how many people are in that store? Customers. 200 customers in there. Then they have these little skinny hipsters called wizards who help us. But they really snob us down and make us feel like a moron, right? But we love Apple, we love the wizards, and we, you know, if you're at lunch and someone with an Android starts talking smack on my iPhone, I'm willing to have a fist fight. Like, I love my Apple phone. I'm old, it makes me feel cool. So we're emotionally connected. Now, Microsoft is on that list, not necessarily as a good example. Microsoft has a store at the mall. Have you seen it? How many people are in there? Nobody. Like nobody's ever, what a sad situation. Nobody ever goes to the Microsoft store. And the reason they don't go to the Microsoft store is because we believe Microsoft is in business for only one reason, to make money. But Apple is in business to help us. And whether you have an Apple or not, you know that's true because you see all the people in the store. So people have that trust and that emotional connection with Apple. They don't have it with Microsoft. If you have a Harley, what's the word you have, the feeling you have? Freedom. Your Harley can be broken and taken apart in the garage, but theoretically you could put it together, drive off into the sunset, right? So when you have a Harley, you have freedom. He put Subaru up there. Obviously, Simon Sinek is not from Oklahoma or Texas, right? Because if it's Oklahoma or Texas, it's pickup truck. That's what we have our emotional connection to. Subaru seems to be the car of emotional connection of people who are interested in legalized marijuana. Have you noticed that all of the legalized marijuana states have a lot of Subarus, like Colorado? Canada has marijuana legal in the whole country, and I'm told Subarus everywhere in Canada. So it's not our thing necessarily here. So what does it have to do?
Subarus before legalized marijuana.
What's that?
In Colorado, we had Subarus before legalized marijuana.
Well, yes. I'll talk to you about it at lunch. I will talk to you about it at lunch. It wasn't necessarily offered as a negative. It was just, all right. Well, where was I on? Oh, I was about to get to the worst part. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. So if you would suspend your personal beliefs for a second and try to look at this in a non-biased way, would you agree that those two candidates provided more of a why during the election than the typical candidate? During the election, they gave a more compelling why I want to be president than the typical presidential candidate does. The typical presidential candidate, I think, is a little bit like Microsoft. Why do you want to be the president? It's fun to be the president, right? Who wouldn't want to be the president? But those two were able to convince a group of people that they were in it for the people and in it for these causes more than most people. So now I'm going to talk about Donald Trump a little bit and only irritate 4 people or less. Here is what I think. When Donald Trump says the things that he says, the problem is the media doesn't take Donald Trump seriously, and I don't think they ever did, but they take him very literally. And his followers take him very seriously, but don't take him literally. So Donald Trump, did you get that? So Donald Trump says stuff like this: I'm not just killing the terrorists, I'm killing their families, right? Well, it's a pretty strong statement, right? And if you're the media, you're like, what? But if you're one of his followers, like, yeah, he doesn't like the terrorists, right? And that's all it really means, right? It's not actually going to do it. Remember, like they were yelling, "Lock up Hillary, lock." The day after, he's not even president. 24 hours. Yeah, she's a fine woman. We're not messing with her. Nobody got upset. It was just fun yelling, lock up Hillary, because it seemed very much like she wanted to be president, and the people who were there don't like typical politicians. That's all. It wasn't really literal. It was a feeling that caused him to be trusted. Donald Trump said during his campaign, I could go out on Fifth Avenue in broad daylight and shoot somebody and my poll numbers wouldn't go down. And of course, people were shocked, but I'm like, I've been saying this for 25 years. The facts don't matter. If you like Donald Trump, no one's talking you out of it. If you don't like Donald Trump, nobody's talking you into it. That's what the answer is. And then he had that rather embarrassing incident on the bus. And everyone's like, it's over now. Look at his poll numbers. Didn't even move, right? And Bernie Sanders appealed to a different group of people, right? They were both appealing to disenfranchised groups. And Bernie Sanders said, I'm giving free college to everybody. And people are like, that's crazy. You can't pay college for everybody. But his disenfranchised people didn't lose their manufacturing jobs. They were people who felt like the system was rigged in a different way. And in Oklahoma State, most of our scholarships go to rich kids from the suburbs who went to a nice high school with two parents. We don't give that many, we give some, but not the lion's share of it is for good grades and good test scores. So there's a whole group of people who feel like they don't have an opportunity to go to college, and Bernie Sanders said things to invigorate that group of people. So the punchline of me showing you is that it's the feeling people get, not actually the action that you get. Do you think I made it through with less than 4 people? Hopefully. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Okay, so that's my story. Hopefully I made it through there. We'll just go on without asking for questions. And if you have a question, you can catch me during lunch. So, this was the connection. And the next one was the win-win attitude. So I brought a picture of, this is one of the richest men in the world. And one of maybe the 30 richest men in the world, worth over $30 billion is his net worth last time I checked. And he was born penniless in China. And when his father died when he was 14, he snuck into Hong Kong with nothing more than the shirt on his back, went to work as a laborer in a plastic flower factory, ended up owning the plastic flower factory and owning other factories, banks, real estate. He controls 15% of all containers traveling around planet Earth, worth over $30 billion. When you ask him, how did you become one of the richest men in the world? He says, from the very, very beginning, every time I made a business deal, and obviously I made thousands of business deals with hundreds of different groups of partners all over the world, and he said, every time I made a deal, I made sure that my partners got paid more money than I did. And if you think about it, like that doesn't make any sense. You'd think one of the richest men in the world would make sure he got the biggest piece. So you're like, how does that work? And he smiles and says, everybody wants to be my partner, right? So because he was generous, everybody wanted him in all the deals that were done around the world. And again, my job is to tell the stories that cause you to think in a certain way that are more likely to lead to success. So this is the win-win guy. He's interested in making the pie bigger instead of fighting for his piece of the pie. And I think you'll agree, this is the best part of the story. His name is Ka-ching. And it's important to me that you know that that really is his name. Li Ka-ching is his name. And every time you are generous to someone else, it's a ka-ching of trust, admiration, and respect into your bank account. So I go from one of the richest men in the world to, you can tell what business he's in. It's car salesman. Not just any car salesman, that's Joe Girard. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the greatest car salesperson of all time. He holds the record for selling the most cars in 1 year, one at a time, to consumers. 1,373 cars is what his 1,373 cars sold one at a time to consumers. And he wrote a book explaining how he did it. I'm not recommending that book. I'll save you 4 hours and $14. I'll just tell you how he did it. Here is what he did. Every single time he sold a car, he wrote down the buyer's name and address. And then every single month, he mailed everyone who ever bought a car from him, he mailed them a card. And when you open up the card, it says, I like you. That was it. Shallow, superficial, and pre-printed. And what Joe Girard figured out is what, my graduate students told me. Under the likable part, I sent my graduate students out years ago to look up the scientific research on why do human beings like each other, right? Because I thought if we know this, since ultimately business liking, and then they come back and tell me why people like each other, and then I try to find the story that connects the reason to you so you can understand it, embrace it, and make it part of the tools that you use. So everybody knows it's important to be liked, but what Joe Girard figured out, what my graduate students told me, is the number one reason that human beings like each other is the information that somebody liked me first. So everybody knows it's good to be liked, but not everybody knows the number one reason people like each other is because you feel like somebody else liked you. So if we take time to show people that we like them, right, it's only going to benefit us. And I'm not asking you to be insincere, but we'll get to that in a second. So how do you show other people that you like them? Who has an idea? You can praise them. You can tell them, right, I like you. Smile at them. Is that what you said? Yeah, smile at them. A matter of fact, some of you have been smiling at me all morning. You are my favorites, right? Because I'm looking at you and trying to decide who likes me and who doesn't. You smile at me, I'm like, oh, that person's nice. So you start liking the people that are smiling. You can tell them, and I don't just tell you this stuff. I try to use it in my life. Hopefully, the people who work with me feel like I like them because I do like them, and. When I took my fiance out to meet my parents, we all went out to dinner, then we get back and I call up my mom, Dad, she really likes you. Get off the phone, sweetie, they really like you. Now they like each other more than any of them like me, so it works like a charm. In my class, believe it or not, students will talk while I'm giving a lecture. Can you believe it? And the other professors who haven't thought this through might respond this way. Excuse me, Tony, please be quiet while I'm lecturing, thank you. They said, excuse me, please, and thank you. About as polite as you can be, but what's Tony thinking? Called me out in front of the whole class. He probably doesn't like me, I don't like him. So he spends the whole semester glaring at me, walks around campus, tell everybody Urich sucks, right? Well, that doesn't do, I didn't mean to say you sound like that, Tony. Whoops, I should have thought that through. I like you, just so you know. So here's what I do instead. I'm giving a lecture, I notice Tony's talking, I say, hey Tony, can't help noticing you're talking, and you know what? I like you. I want you to get an A. Now, listen, I'm explaining this is going to be on the test. Please pay attention, I like you, I want you to get an A. What does he think now? He likes me, I like him. Leave me alone, Kyle, I got to take notes, right? And he starts writing away, right? So it is, I don't have time to go through all 10 of the reasons that people like each other, but I can tell you this, none of them are any good. They're all shallow and superficial reasons. We like people who look nice at work, we like people who compliment us. So there was research on, let me make sure this slide is not up there, so I'm pretty sure. Oh yeah, it is. So we like people who dress well. When you dress up more, people actually like, and those would be people who you haven't met yet. But those are the characteristics that my graduate students found about people, about the advantages we get by dressing up more versus dressing up less. We like people who have something in common with us. So I do this when I used to teach international law. I would, just to show how international relations work, I would draw a line down the middle of the room and I would say, all of you guys are A and all of you guys are B, and then I would just keep my mouth shut. But we're all B's now and you're all A's now. And within 60 seconds, someone would yell, A's rule, B's suck, let's get shirts, right? All you have to do is put people together and they feel like it's good. So some of you probably have ties to OSU, and you go back and forth between OU professors and OSU professors. So if you have an OSU tie and I show up at some tie to OSU and I show up probably starting a little above zero, you're like, oh, this will be good. And if you went to OU, I'm starting a little bit below zero, right? You're very suspicious, who is this guy? How do you get people from OSU and OU to like each other? It's easy, we just go to Texas. Now we're both Oklahomans, we have that in common, right? How do you get an Oklahoman and a Texan to like each other? Easy, just meet in France. Now we're both Americans. I expected a better reaction, be honest. If you were walking around France, you'd be damn happy to see a Texan, wouldn't you? So anyway, so it's weird, but we have these similarities. We like people who give us compliments, even if, I mentioned this earlier, even if the compliment is perceived, okay, so my graduate students brought a study, and in this study, people gave a compliment that was false. So they told you something about yourself that was not true. They also gave it for transparent reasons. So I only gave you the compliment because I wanted something. It still worked. So insincere compliments given for transparent reasons actually on average work. I'm not asking you to be insincere. I don't think it builds trust and admiration, respect in the long run, even though it works. However, I would say this. Because we don't have to worry about insincere compliments, you should never be concerned about giving a sincere compliment. So when you compliment people, it makes them like you. I also point out, there's people from HR here, make sure you know what you can compliment and what you can't compliment, because I would hate for people to call me and say I started something. So I happen to know this is true. As part of my job for years was taking OSU students to New York City, and one year, I was walking down the streets of New York City by myself, and this homeless lady came running up to me out of the alley. She ran up to me and she said, "You are good looking." I said, "You get $1." Right? I knew exactly what her scheme was, but I liked it. It's the only woman who ever said that to me. I walked back and forth, hoping it would happen again, right? So you can see the other top 10 reasons: familiarity, listening, friendly. We talked about smiling, nodding, leaning in, and optimistic people. So we're coming to the end of my time. I want to leave a few minutes for questions. I want to say one more thing under avoiding conflicts and confrontations, and that's, it really goes back again to the question that Susan asked me, can we change? And the answer is absolutely, but we have to remember, the main thing that's going to help put what we talked about in these 2 hours to work is if we identify influence opportunities, stop, and then think just a little bit before we pick up the phone, before we send the email, before we meet with the team. And if you have something big, like, we're going to budget meeting, you may spend an hour going over your 4 things, figuring out the best way to put those 4 rules together. So my last story is going to be pointing out that it's important to remember. So, of course, I'm sitting in the living room shortly after I was married, minding my own business. My wife comes into the living room and says, "Do you want to go to Montana? My cousin's getting married." What am I thinking? Absolutely not. And let me tell you all the good reasons. First of all, it's the busiest weekend of my life. Spring semester ends on Friday. Summer school starts on Monday. I have 800 grades due Tuesday night. Summer school is going to get rolling. It was 3 plane legs at the time to land somewhere in Montana, drive 160 miles to the bar where they're getting married. Then you get up early on Sunday, come all the way back. I remember like $3,000 is how much I think, at least in my mind, that's what it was going to be. So I really didn't want to go. And lucky for me, as soon as she said, "Do you want to go?" a warning went off in my head. Warning, warning. Instead of talking, the warning went off. Because if the warning hadn't gone off, what would I have said? No, I don't want to go to Montana, busiest weekend of my life. And how would the story have ended? I'd have told you how much fun I had in Montana, right? That's how the story ended. So fortunately, the alarm went off, warning, warning, and I stopped and I thought about it for a minute. And I thought, there's what she said and what I heard, but there's also what she's thinking and what I'm thinking. By the time you get from what she's thinking to what I'm thinking, this is like kindergarten, where you whispered that secret, it went around the circle and came out completely different. What my wife is probably thinking is, does my new husband love me enough to go to Montana on the busiest weekend of my life? But that's not what she said. If she would have said that, I'm not a total moron, I would have said yes. What she said is, do you want to go to Montana? What I heard is, do I have to go to Montana? And what I'm thinking is, do I want to spend $3,000 on the busiest weekend of my life to fly to the middle of nowhere, because a bunch of my wife's barefoot, toothless relatives are having a hoedown? And the answer to that is no, but what I said is, that sounds interesting. And I said it with great enthusiasm, right? Because it did sound interesting. If someone else was going, I'd like to hear about it, right? So the punchline of that story is, we're only going to be able to use all the clever things that you can think of if you become conscious of influence opportunities and look at it from the other person's point of view. And I have these expressions that get me out of jams. So another one is, someone's got a bad idea. That's an idea. No need to discuss it, say we're doing it. That's an idea, and I say it with great enthusiasm. I even have one. Hopefully you don't have this problem. But some of my relatives are into conspiracy theories. And they tell you the conspiracy theory, and it's the most outlandish, ridiculous thing in the world. And then when they're done explaining it, they look at you, and you have to talk. And you literally can't think. Does this ever happen to you? You're like, what can I say? What can I say? What? You can't think of anything to say. Just say this. Huh? Is that right? And this gets me out of all kinds of awkward situations. Students tell me stories, is that right? I'm much more relaxed now that I have that as my exit strategy. So, I will pause for questions. We have time for a few questions. Anybody, anything? All right, well, we probably go to lunch a little bit early if no one has a question. Let me tell you a couple things before I set you free. One is, everything I said this morning, I guarantee my work. Here's how the guarantee works. If you try the influence, the 4 steps, you try it and it works, there's my email address, my website has my phone number, send me an email, give me a call. If it works, tell me the story, I'll change the names, teach this stuff to our students, I'll share the story with students, and we will help pass on the greatness of your influence abilities. Now, here's where the guarantee comes in. If you try it and it doesn't work, give me a call, I'll explain what you did wrong, because it always works. I guarantee my work. And I imagine that Kelly is going to ask you what you thought of my presentation this morning, so the last thing I want to say is, I like you. Thank you. So Kelly, we're off to lunch somewhere.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Urich.
Thank you.